There's one Canadian family whose history is well documented, the Laffertys. Their history begins with William Lafferty. What we do know is that when he was 20, he arrived in Canada from the United States in the middle of August 1830 with a net worth of $0. This is the short version of the story of how the Lafferty family achieved money, power, and respect in Canada. Laws that fully abolished the enslavement of people in Canada had not yet been passed. But in what is now Ontario, no new enslavements could occur, and full abolition was not far ahead. By the time he settled in the town of York, they had just come out of a cholera epidemic, but the nearby harbor was booming with economic activity. William first found work as a general laborer, but then began to specialize as a carter, which is a person who moves goods around between business places, the wharves, the market, and building sites. Records show that at that time, a carter's license cost £1 and 5 shillings and were valid for 1 year. Later on, carters would take on additional responsibilities, being made responsible for carting water to extinguish the fires which were all too common in Toronto at the time. In April 1833, he married Sarah Cloud. They were married in what was then the Wesleyan Methodist Society Chapel on George Street in Toronto. Owning real estate was a priority for most of the people settling in Canada. William Lafferty was no different. 4 years after he arrived, he purchased a frame house on Stewart's Lane, which was later renamed to Francis Street, just east of the St. James Courtyard. It was the first of what would turn out to be many real estate investments that William Lafferty made. William and Sarah initially had 3 sons: William Dennis Lafferty, born in 1834, John, their second son, born in 1837, and Alfred Mitchell, born in 1839. He also had a daughter, Sarah, who was born in 1842. By 1842, 12 years after he had come to Canada, William Lafferty owned 6 properties in and around the city. He also moved his family from their original home on Stewart's Lane to a much nicer property on Newgate Street, which would later become Adelaide Street East. In August 1842, when he became a British subject after taking the oath of allegiance to the British Crown, he signed his name to the register, which is sometimes used to infer that he learned to read and write after coming to Canada. William left the cartage business and opened up a provision store in his home at 87 Adelaide Street East. He also ran a grocery store on Yonge Street, somewhere between Adelaide and King. William benefited from the fact that Toronto had more opportunities for black people than the United States, but still it wasn't completely immune from the virus that is racism. Even though he enjoyed the relative success of being a property and business owner, Toronto was still the kind of place where they had racist theatrical performances. Blackface minstrel groups regularly performed as a part of theater productions and circuses. For example, the Royal Lyceum Theatre in Toronto featured a group called the Ethiopian Harmonists, pretty much made up of white actors who put on blackface makeup and did a parody of slave life on the plantation. It was a weird contrast. Toronto was simultaneously free enough to allow Lafferty to become a property and business owner, very successful, while simultaneously backwards enough to be entertained by the so-called dandy Negroes and quote-unquote southern plantation darkies that were promoted in this grotesque form of entertainment. It was popular in the cities and regularly spilled out onto the streets of Toronto. Windsor newspaper owner Henry Bibb, himself a former enslaved person, summed up Canadian attitudes in an editorial of his paper called The Voice of the Fugitive. He basically blamed the influence of the American South on shaping Canadian attitudes towards race.
Color-phobia is a contagious disease. It is more destructive to the mind than to the body. It goes with a person who is a little nervous. It makes them sing out, "Darky, darky, nigger, nigger." It sometimes makes them quack like crows. It frightens them up from the dining table at public houses, not because of a black man's cooking the dinner or waiting on them, but because of his sitting down to eat. It excites them awfully when colored passengers enter the rail cars or stagecoaches, but not when they come in the capacity of waiters or servants. It sometimes gets into children through the wicked and unnatural teaching of their parents.
While it was not mandatory at the time for children to attend school, all of the Lafferty children understood the importance of a higher education. The Lafferty family's bent towards higher education and personal excellence is clearly played out in the life of Alfred, William Lafferty's third son. For some reason, Alfred was taken out of school in the hustle and bustle of Toronto and sent to a new school in a farming community near the Elgin Settlement at Buxton in Kent County near Chatham, Ontario. The Elgin Settlement had been established by a Presbyterian minister, the Reverend William King, in 1849. It was supposed to be something of a haven for those fleeing enslavement. 9,000 acres of clergy reserve land had been granted by the Governor General of Canada, Lord Elgin, for this purpose. This settlement extended from just south of Chatham all the way to Lake Erie. The first school in the settlement opened in 1850. It was a non-segregated school in an area where all the other schools were segregated, and it taught every academic subject, including things like Latin and Greek and all the basics of literacy. The newspaper publisher and abolitionist Mary Ann Shadd said this about the school at Elgin, quote, "The school for the settlers at Elgin is so far superior to the one established for white children that the latter was discontinued," end quote, which led to all of the children attending the Buxton school together. Alfred was not the only prominent black Canadian at the school either. The family of Anderson Ruffin Abbott, the man who would become the first Canadian-born black doctor, actually moved from Toronto just so Anderson could attend the school at Buxton in the settlement. By 1853, Alfred had returned to Toronto to enroll at the Upper Canada College. He was a star student there, and in 1856 he won a scholarship that paid for his entire schooling at Upper Canada College. Currently, his name is inscribed on the honor roll in the Laidlaw Hall at the new Upper Canada College in the north end of the city on Avenue Road. Eventually, Alfred made it to university in 1860. Unfortunately, William did not live to see this because he passed away in 1859. Alfred had won a scholarship to the University of Toronto, but even if he hadn't, he wouldn't have needed it. William Lafferty's hard work had left the family with a sizable portfolio of properties as well as at least 2 businesses when he passed away. Alfred's genius-level academic performance continued as he attended the University of Toronto. Here is what the president of the University of Toronto, Dr. John McCall, said about Alfred's exceptional academic performance.
I can give you my own experience in regard to the capacity of the blacks. We had a mulatto here who took the double first in both classics and mathematics. He has very great ability. There are few whites who can do what he did. I do not think there have been more than 3 instances in which it has been done since the university was opened 20 years ago. Lafferty is the young man's name. His father was a man of very humble capacity, and I think a full black. I do not hesitate to say, in regard to Mr. Lafferty, that he is equal to any white man, far superior to the average of them. It was a great subject of astonishment to some of our Kentucky friends who came over here last year in October when they saw this mulatto get the first prize for Greek verse which he had to recite. And he was the crack man of the day, all the others listening to him with great pleasure.
Alfred was actively involved in university life. Eventually, he became the secretary of the University College Literary and Athletic Society. Still, he found himself dealing with that odd contrast that his father dealt with in Toronto. Like the city it was in, the university was progressive enough to allow Alfred to ascend to some of the highest positions. At the same time, some of the things that Alfred endured didn't reflect this progressive mentality. For example, some Southern American families had sent their sons to be educated in Toronto, basically to get them away from the tensions that were mounting around the Civil War. Many of them were shocked when they saw that they found themselves at a university with Alfred Lafferty, a black man and also a brilliant student. Every black man they had known in their entire life was forbidden to either read or write. These American students tried to force Alfred out of the literary and athletic society. This built up to Alfred being ejected from an athletic society meeting for an unknown reason. Eventually, Alfred continued as a member of the society, but he attended the meetings way less frequently. Still, these terrible experiences did not faze him or make him bitter. In 1863, Alfred Lafferty received his Bachelor of Arts, one of only 16 that were given that year by the University College. Out of university, Alfred secured a position as the headmaster of the Richmond Hill County Grammar School, just north of Toronto. The school had 40 students, he was the only teacher, and he would earn $600 per year, a decent salary in those times. He not only worked at the school, but he was also a member of the management committee of the Mechanics Institute, which is the forerunner of the Richmond Hill Library, and he was also a member of the Richmond Masonic Lodge. In 1870, the same year he got married to Miss Isabella Campbell, Alfred received a job offer from the Lindsay Grammar School for $1,000 a year. When he left there, he went to work as the headmaster of the high school in Guelph, being paid $1,000 a year and being provided with a house near the school on Paisley Street in Guelph. They would move again in response to another job offer when Alfred was appointed principal of the recently opened Wilberforce Educational Institute in Chatham, Ontario. The Laffertys put down roots in Chatham. First, they lived on a house in King Street near First Street. Chatham became a permanent home for the Laffertys as they participated in professional life, with Alfred practicing law, regularly advertising in the Chatham Tri-Weekly Planet. He was officially Chatham's first lawyer of African descent. Alfred Lafferty eventually died on October 18, 1912. William Lafferty arrived in Canada in 1830, illiterate and poor. Before 10 years had passed, he was a property owner and businessman. By all measures of success, they were winners, with his son Alfred a particularly intellectual bright spot.